The future that's shaping up for the human race is just absolutely amazing. I'm incredibly optimistic about the next couple decades. There's so many cool things going on. You want to be out here and you want to be participating in it because it's going to be a really amazing future and you don't want to miss out. It's just fantastic.
Welcome to the Borderless Podcast, your guide to traveling, investing, and living beyond borders, where we talk about living the life that you want to live, where you want to live it. From beautiful San Miguel de Allende, smack in the middle of Mexico, with your hosts, Jonathan Lockwood and James Guzman.
Welcome to the Borderless Podcast, traveling, investing, and living beyond borders. This is the podcast where we talk about living outside of your borders, whether they're international, whether they are psychological. Jonathan Lockwood here, along with James Guzman. How you doing, James?
I'm doing well. You know, I'm back here, San Miguel de Allende, feeling well and rested after my time in Acapulco there.
Yeah, it took you several days to rest up, I noticed. Your car didn't move from the same spot for about 3 days.
Yeah, but it's good to be back. Although it's a kind of crazy weather today. It's been pouring down, but so good to be back.
And not only that, James, I'm told that this rain may keep up for like another week or more.
Oh, boy. Don't tell me that.
Pretty crazy here.
Yeah.
So we are here with the Borderless Podcast, and we're excited to talk to a guy. Now, something like, I don't know when this was, maybe 3-4 weeks ago, something like that. I found somebody posted this interesting article, and I don't even know where I found it, but it was written by a guy, and it was entitled, "Why in the Midst of Success, I'm Preparing to Leave the U.S." And I really liked it. I liked what he wrote. I mean, I didn't like it. I identified with it. And I thought, wow, this is just one of those reasons why there are people, at least in the country where you and I were both born, in the United States, are deciding, you know, I think I'm going to relocate. I think I'm going to go somewhere else. And so not that long after, you met him there in Acapulco, didn't you?
Yeah, well, I was actually having lunch, and then he mentioned, I wrote this, we were having lunch with 3 people, and he just mentioned, I wrote this article, and I realized that was him that we talked about a week before. And I was pretty impressed also because, at this hotel, there wasn't that great of internet. And somehow Travis just went through with his laptop on each floor and made the internet wonderful. So that was incredible to me. I'd never seen that before. But
that is a talent, man.
Yeah,
right there. If you can freaking do that, I would think you could go to every business in San Miguel and probably everywhere else and just say, hey, 500 pesos, I'll improve your Wi-Fi, because everyone's always complaining about it. But we're going to get into the details of this, but the basic story is, guy living in rural Oregon satisfied a need with a business. He and some friends, they had terrible internet coverage, and so they fixed this problem. They did a really, really great job, and they worked their ass off for 5 years, and it was a success. They cover something like 500 square miles of rural Oregon with genuine broadband speed up to 26 megabytes per second. And for some reason, something has happened, and he has decided, forget it. We're walking away from this. We're going to get out of this, and we'll see how this goes. So welcome, Travis Boyd.
Well, thanks, Jonathan.
Travis, why don't you tell us first, where are you from originally? Are you from Oregon?
Kind of a couple of different places. Started out my life in the Northeast U.S., moved overseas, spent a good chunk of my childhood in Southern Africa, in Zimbabwe.
Whoa!
And ended up back in the U.S. just as I was starting high school.
Wasn't expecting that Zimbabwe, but that's cool. And so you found your way to Oregon, and at some point you noticed there was a problem that needed to be fixed. And why don't you tell us about that? Yeah.
So we'd lived about an hour and a half from D.C. When I was a child. So when we came back to the U.S., my dad was like, "Hey, how far can we get from D.C. and still be in the U.S.?" And that was kind of one of the. We ended up in Northeast Oregon, and in this beautiful mountain valley. And I went to high school there. Left to find work in the IT space, and ended up there a couple years later, back in my home county, and the internet service was just terrible. There was the fastest you could get was 768 kbps, not even a full megabit. So two buddies and I, who I'd gone to, one of them I'd gone to high school with, we were like, hey, this is a amazing business opportunity. People want something, it's not here. Let's make it happen. So, we pulled a couple grand, literally just a couple grand, got some radio equipment, and started building out our own ISP from scratch, and just gradually just grew it slowly, nice and slowly, spread via word of mouth, don't advertise, no government subsidies, and just gradually built our coverage out to where, we cover about just over 500 square miles of this country. It's kind of a myth that, you need a big pile of government money to do broadband in rural areas. You don't. You just need a couple committed guys who are willing to do what it takes. Spend a couple years of their lives building something. So it's been really rewarding. Building something from scratch where there wasn't anything before. It's just been an amazing adventure.
How many people would you say, Travis, that this is covering in that 500 square mile area?
Oh, I think we've just recently passed 500 monthly customers, and it's really spread out here. These are farms, ranches, cabins back in the woods, sort of thing, where it would just not even be feasible to cover this sort of population with a government subsidized standard big telecom business. They can't make the sorts of deals that we can. We've got radio relays on people's roofs, on the sides of people's barns, on grain silos. We just make a private agreement with some guy, say, hey, can we put some stuff on your house? We'll give you a free connection so we can serve these other 5 houses back in the woods a little bit. And people are like, yeah, sure, that's great.
Okay, so some people, something like 500 people who before had really terrible internet access coverage, strength, quality, are very happy now, right?
Yeah, satisfied customers that's our only advertising, and it's worked great.
But despite this, and despite the fact that you've been successful in helping, knowing the state that the internet plays in people's lives today and how important it is to them, and what a success this has been, you've decided to walk away from it. Is that right?
Essentially, that's right. Yeah. The government situation is there's 2 main things that are going on. One of them you spoke about, the FCC's Network Neutrality Act, and the other one is a tax situation here in Oregon. This tax issue is a little bit complicated, but it's essentially kind of taken the wind out of my sails as far as being an entrepreneur here in the U.S. I don't like working in regulated industries. That's why I do the self-employment thing, and I like to build my own companies. And the network neutrality thing, the big deal breaker on that for me was the fact that they've turned our private company into a public utility.
Okay, let's talk about that. All right, we're just going to talk first of all what net neutrality claims to be. Okay, so this is the idea that the internet service providers and governments should treat all data on the internet equally, not discriminating or charging differently by user, content, site, platform, application, type of equipment, or mode of communication. That is what it is claimed to be, correct?
Claimed to be, yeah.
And what is it in reality, Travis?
Well, in reality, it's basically the government's attempt to get a regulatory handle on the internet itself. Larger providers have been sort of in bed with the government for a long time, pretty much forever. Back to the AT&T days. And these days, the big outfits are essentially an extension of the national security state. But there's all these smaller providers. There's all these innovative online businesses that are providing communications services over the top of these legacy guys. And it's kind of been getting out of their hands. As I'm sure a lot of your listeners know, that the internet's been a really valuable tool for letting people build freedom. And I'm sure people have heard various politicians talking recently about how the internet's making it hard to govern people. People are too politically aware. People are too tuned in and too informed. And as challenging as this is for a bureaucracy, they're trying to figure out a way, how can we get some sort of handle on this thing? And this is the initial groundwork. They've tried various other things, the SOPA, the PIPA, the various content control legislation that keeps getting shot down. They said it was going to address the traffic issue. People are throttling Netflix. People are shaping your traffic. Companies are shaping your traffic. You're not getting equal access to all the content that you want as a consumer. So that's the vehicle they used to bring it through. They got the sort of popular support from the American consumer to push this thing through. And I've just finished reading this thing. It's a couple hundred pages. It just got released 2 days ago, the final write-up. A couple hundred pages of densely packed legalese. And I've just churned through it, and nowhere in there does it actually address that Netflix issue, the fight between Netflix and Comcast. It actually says in there, we don't feel as the FCC we're qualified enough to address that particular issue of peering between private companies. But here's all this other stuff. Just one of the small bits is later this year, we're going to have to start dealing with the Universal Service Fund taxes. As a private ISP, up until now, I've been able to give my customers just a flat fee. Hey, here, $35 a month, $45 a month for whatever speed you're purchasing. No taxes, fees, no hidden BS, none of that. Just one flat fee. People love that. It's been one of our selling points. But now I'm going to have to do all this extra paperwork. There's going to be 8 different additional lines on your bill saying, here's the Universal Service Fund tax for the municipality and the city and the state and the feds, all this other stuff that they could basically ratchet up at any time. There's a number of other big loopholes they've left open. It's like any of the legislation that's been rolled out recently that has this. It's got this name attached to it that sounds all nice, and this is a positive thing. This is for your benefit.
Nice Orwellian names to push on the populace.
Yeah. So it sounds great, but it's in many cases it's got the exact opposite effect on society. And this is one of those things. Network neutrality, okay, fair and equal access, except you've got basically the government now stepping into the picture where before it was just private agreements between companies. This peering issue between Netflix and Comcast, that's come up. That comes up. Something like that comes up a couple times a year.
What is the issue? Will you explain that for us as succinctly as possible?
Sure. As best as I can understand it without being an employee of either company. So if you've got a big content distribution company like Netflix, and you've got another company who provides access to the customer, the end customer, like Comcast, at some point on the internet, those two companies interconnect with each other, usually in a special facility called a peering exchange. There's a big building in each major city where all these networks come together, and they've each got a rack of equipment, and they connect to each other. The speed at which they connect to each other is pretty important when you get a lot of traffic flowing between the two companies. And let's say the traffic builds and you've got to upgrade that link between the two companies. Well, somebody's got to pay for that upgrade. And Netflix has been they're usually willing to make deals, but there's also the temptation for them to use the pressure of their customers' demand to try and leverage deals between other companies. So they tried to use their customers' demand and ended up sort of using it in a political fashion to try and leverage Comcast. And Comcast was pushing back and refusing to upgrade the connection until money changed hands. And it went back and forth and back and forth. And then the politicians stepped in and were like, hey, this is a good opportunity for us to introduce some regulation to handle this issue, which they didn't end up addressing in the regulation. So it was basically a private disagreement between two companies about how they exchange traffic with each other, which has up until now been handled by the private market just fine. Companies come to an agreement, money changes hands, it's all good. But because Netflix is such a paradigm buster on the internet, and the American consumers got such a growing sense of entitlement these days to sort of the freebie mentality, Netflix didn't really have the pricing flexibility to raise their prices as far as their consumers are concerned, so they had to use other means.
Basically, what happened is, at the federal level, the introduction of this net neutrality thing, which is supposedly an attempt to level the playing field, in reality basically reclassifies all U.S. broadband providers as public utilities at the federal level. And as a result of that, there is more federal control. And what might that lead to for you?
For starters, the reclassification really, there was a day or two where I wasn't really fit for polite conversation. We built this thing from scratch. We don't use public money. We don't use public rights of way. It's all private deals. And to have that suddenly become, with the stroke of a pen, public property, if you read through this network neutrality Title II thing, there's a lot of conditionalities that they've put in there where they've said, for now, and this is actually, they state in there, for now, we're not going to impose some of the more burdensome regulations on some of the smaller companies for now, while this is gelling, while this is still sort of under construction. And some of those heavier things include things like price controls, like you can't charge your customers too little, because that wouldn't be fair to other bigger outfits,
Oh my God. Really?
And that's the thing, is we've dropped our prices 3 times over the 5 years we've been running, and increased our speeds, which people seem to dig that. And you can't charge too much. You can't shape traffic, like you can't, somebody's running umpteen billion torrents from their home connection. You can't try and manage that so that the rest of the customers on that segment of the network don't get crushed. I'm only going to be able to pay myself so much. I won't be able to pay myself above industry standard rates, which, as a company that I built, it's one of the ideas is I just keep paying myself more and more and more as time goes on. Sweet. Yeah, that's kind of why it's worth doing. I don't do this for free, but another big one is line sharing requirements. Traditionally, a telecom builds, they run lines along public streets and public rights of way. And in many cases, those lines were constructed using government money. So there's a sharing condition. Like if another company comes in and they want to deliver service to a group of customers, they can get access through the lines that are existing. In our case, we've built all the lines ourselves with, we use microwave links, point-to-point wireless links to distribute. And the idea of sharing that infrastructure that we privately constructed with another company just because the government says so doesn't sit too well either. Then, of course, there's the whole national security aspect of things. One of the cool things about a small private network like this is you've basically built a little autonomous zone, a little zone of freedom. My customers can, if they want to set up private communications links between themselves, it stays inside this network. It doesn't go out onto the internet as a whole where it can be sniffed and snooped and tapped and scanned. And so there's going to be some requirements in that regard. That hasn't been spelled out specifically, but I'm not looking forward to the details on that. That's one thing that's been really important to me is providing sort of a safe communication space for people out here.
Gotcha. Okay, well, so very interesting. I want to talk to you a little bit about, there was also a state action that involved Comcast as well. And then we want to talk to you about how you imagine this may roll out in the coming months or years and what your plan is for the future. But right now we want to take a moment and give attention to one of our sponsors. Today's Borderless podcast is brought to you by the Condescending Group. The thing that our friends at the Condescending Group appreciate about themselves is their clear and obvious superiority in the areas of sharing and kindness. In fact, they'll be having an online roundtable discussion next month that discusses why they and their fellow collectivist friends are just, well, they hate to say it, but just better than others. And they really want to isolate how kindness is always the goal. Yes, kindness is always more important than truth, and intentions more important than reality to the Condescending Group. There'll be some really great conversations about why those not like them tend to be meaner and less kind. There are many emotion-based theories about it, but one thing all the Condescending Group members agree on: anyone not subscribing to their highbrow philosophies is unkind, selfish, and needs to be high-fived in the face with a chair. Don't worry, when you're in with the unproductive, self-congratulating types at the Condescending Group, it's okay to criticize other people for things you yourself do, because after all, you've already proven your kind intentions and superior intellect. The Condescending Group, we care more than you. Okay, we're back with Travis Boyd, an engineer and entrepreneur living in Oregon, who wrote a really great piece called Why in the Midst of Success, I'm Preparing to Leave the U.S. He started an internet service providing company there in Northeast Oregon, a very rural area, made it into a great success. He's brought real broadband speed to the residents there, and they're very happy about it. But then the state entered in and got him to the point where he's finally looking at giving up. So we talked about the net neutrality issue and how that is ending up being like a de facto nationalization. But a little something extra happened to you there in Oregon with the state. Is that right, Travis?
That's right, yeah.
What was that?
Well, it's a tax situation. The gist of it is there was a a set of taxes that Comcast was being required to pay, primarily to the more metro counties on the east side of the state, or the west side of the state, the more populated counties where they operate. And they didn't feel that they were legally required to pay these taxes. And it's been going back and forth legally for about 4 or 5 years, I think. And the Comcast lawyers finally realized, hey, we've got a leg to stand on here. Based on our reading, we shouldn't have to pay these taxes. And they were right. The problem that the state ran into is that many of the counties that have been collecting these taxes hadn't been doing what many of us would think would be the smart thing, which is putting this money into escrow. I think only Multnomah County, one of the bigger counties, officially had an escrow account, and nobody really knows whether the money's actually in the account or not. But a lot of this money's just gone right back out the door. Oregon is, being a socialist state with a lot of programs, it's really strapped. It's really hurting for cash. The tax base has collapsed over the last couple of years.
Okay, I just want to take a moment just to make sure that we understand this. So, Oregon and Comcast have been in dispute about these taxes.
Right.
And of course, unlike any other area of life, the state says, well, while we are disputing this, you must still pay us because we're the state. Okay, this would never happen in a private circumstance. So Comcast is like, okay, while we're disputing this in the court of law, we will continue to pay you. And the state, instead of taking this money that they've been receiving, which is in total dispute, and putting it away, went, no, we're spending it. Okay, and so because they've spent it, now it's gone through the legal battle. What was the determination of the court?
Well, the determination of the lawyers was that they didn't owe the taxes, but like you said, the money's not there to really give back, and so it's not politically feasible to give it back. So the Oregon Supreme Court issued this ruling. They did some fancy footwork and issued this ruling that basically says, we're going to reclassify Comcast as a different type of provider that is subject to these taxes. Oh, and we're going to make it retroactive a couple years back so that, hey, the problem solved. But in order to do that, they had to sweep all the smaller providers in Oregon in with Comcast to make that legal footwork stick. And what that means is, well, for Comcast, it means they're on the hook for $500 million of taxes. For us, it means that not only do we have to start paying property taxes in a different model. Usually property taxes are assessed by your county. Like they look at, you've got some stuff, you've got an office and some trucks and this and that. It's worth X. Here's the tax rate. Central assessment is the state itself decides, we think your stuff is worth this much. We're going to assess you based on what we think an ISP's infrastructure is worth. And it includes a class of things called intangibles, which are things like brand recognition, customer loyalty, potential coverage area based on the demographics, things like that. That is just there's no way to value them. It's basically a tax on effort I haven't put out, money I haven't actually made yet. So, in a nutshell, being taxed on the potential that I might do some work in the future. Boy, between that and the FCC stuff, that's kind of the straw that pushed me over the edge.
Okay. All right. So action on both the part of the state and the federal level has led to a situation that will likely make it untenable for this to be interesting to you. I mean, something like 500 people in this 500 square mile, okay? It's kind of small. It wasn't worth it for the big guys to move in there. It wasn't attractive to them. So you did. You did something good for the community. But people don't just do these things for nothing in return. They work their ass off for years and they put their heart, soul, blood, and sweat into it because they think, well, maybe at the end of it, I'll get a little something out of it. And then the state moves in and says, no, there are certain intangibles, you see. And now it's like, well, it isn't worth it anymore, And so you wrote this article. What would you say? Where are you with this? What do you think the timing is of this and of your intentions for the future, Travis?
Well, we were going to do a number of fairly large upgrades. We were going to build some new towers and really kick our game up a notch. The new equipment that we're just getting into the shop will let us do 100 meg to the home, comparable to fiber speeds. But now with the state, especially the state tax thing, it actually makes no sense for us to build significant infrastructure because we'll have to pay these crazy taxes on it.
Yeah.
So it's completely counterproductive. So I'm looking at basically either having to roll our network into this municipal broadband project and give up ownership of it, or do essentially the same thing with a local nonprofit or something like that. As much as I want to just walk away and wash my hands of the whole situation, this is where I went to high school. I've got friends out here. I've got fellow businessmen out here who use my network, who depend on my network to do their thing. And so I've got to figure out a way, how can I keep this thing running in the face of this regulation? And I think we've got that pretty much figured out. We've got a couple different options, but it's not going to be mine anymore.
Will you be getting paid for it? I mean, or are you just going to be giving it to somebody?
Well, I might still try and figure out a way where I can do some occasional subcontracting, but I've got a whole head full of great business ideas to start. I was going to build another one right here in town, but if this is the direction the country's going, my dad's a medical doctor, and he just had to deal with the ACA, the so-called Obamacare thing. And he's retiring, and a lot of other small town docs are retiring and having to get their practice, their little clinic practices rolled into bigger hospital infrastructure. Now so they socialized medical care. Now they're socializing telecom. I was going to start a cool big old aquaponics facility, which, I don't know how much people know about aquaponics, but it's sort of a intensive water conserving greenhouse farming method using fish to fertilize the plants. It makes zero sense for me to build that here in the U.S. now. The U.S. was the exception to the rule in the world, where you knew if you started a business there was some freedom. There was some space to be an entrepreneur, and you could count on getting at least a decent percentage of the fruits of your labors. But if the U.S. is getting so socialized now, why would I start a amazing new business idea here when they could nationalize the food supply in another couple years, and there goes my new business. So I'm going to actually be concentrating on starting new businesses outside of the U.S. at this point.
And what are you thinking about in that regard, Travis? Where and what?
Well, I've actually, this is a bit of a sidetrack. I heard about the Gulch Chili project a couple years ago, and I'd approached the guy who was in charge of that about building a wireless network to cover Gulch Chili, and I was going to use that as a way to get down into Chile and get a foothold going down there. I've always loved that part of the world. I really like the Patagonia, but as that was sort of falling apart, I met this guy through that project called Luke Crowley, and he and this other fellow, or a couple other people, have started this project called Fort Galt, which is kind of an entrepreneurial maker community where you can, families can move in, and you can. It's kind of like a business. It's a lot of things. It's a business incubator. It's a open source research campus. It's turning into a lot of different things. I'm going to build my aquaponics farm there, as well as provide this place a kick-ass IT infrastructure. And then, I'm not going to be there year round. I'll take IT contracts. I've been hanging out my shingle internationally, and I'd really like to do some traveling and help other people build this sort of distributed telecommunications type of network. If you've got a private community, there's a number of them shaping up around the world. Acapulco is one. There's a number of expats moving there. San Miguel, there's a number of expats moving there. There's La Estancia de Cafayate, Doug Casey's development in Argentina. There's one called Rancho. Oh boy, I forget the last name of it. Done by the Agora folks on the Pacific coast somewhere. But as places like this develop, there's an opportunity, IT-wise, to build out private networks for them, to connect them to each other with secure tunnels through the internet, so you can gradually start to build this distributed community that people can bounce from place to place and do the sort of digital nomad thing. So it's really exciting. there was a point, I was pretty upset about the ratcheting up here in the U.S., but I've gotten past that. I've started to look at the opportunities that are presenting themselves internationally, and as I was phrasing it, the state meant it as a punch in the face. I'm taking it as a kick in the ass, and I'm getting out there.
That's a great way to look at it, man. So we three, are from the United States, and we saw all our lives people coming into the United States for a better life. And now we're just basically taking our cues from them. We never saw this coming, but it has come. And so now I guess you go someplace where it makes more sense to go.
Yeah, this was a nation of people who left a bad situation before to come to a place where there was a better situation. So now it's time to do that again. The grass really is greener on the other side of the fence at this point.
Yeah, well, let's talk a little bit more about the net neutrality thing. I'd like to, see what some of your thoughts are on how this thing may unfold in the coming years, and what does it mean to people in that, maybe not necessarily that own ISPs, but that work on the internet or other internet-based companies, or that work a lot with the internet in the United States or even outside of the United States, I guess. How is that going to affect them?
Well, that I haven't looked too closely at, being on the service provider side, but like we were talking about, legislation has the opposite effect of what's on the label. This is going to give the government increased control over regulating the internet, the types of traffic, the way traffic is carried. And although this current administration is ostensibly saying, hey, this is about equal priority for traffic, how many times over the last couple of years have we seen legislation trotted out where they're trying to clamp down on file sharing, they're trying to clamp down on various aspects of people exchanging information back and forth based on the copyright issue and that sort of thing. The political winds blow this way and that in this country. And as a businessman, especially an online businessman, you've got to be able to plan. You've got to be able to strategize. You've got to be able to lay your business strategy out for the next couple of years. And now that they've got this regulation put into place, at any time, the way that traffic is managed could be changed. They could say, hey, you're not allowed to do this type of communication. Or as an ISP, here's a special little box from the NSA you've got to put in your network so that we can really closely monitor everything that's going on. It's not anything that's happened right now. It's really set the framework for really heavy regulation in the future. And what form that's going to take, I'm not sure. But the 2016, 2017 election cycle is coming up real quick. And the type of administration that's shaping up, whichever hand the baton gets handed to, it's not going to be good for freedom on the internet. And as a businessman, I've got to be able to plan, and I can't work with that sort of uncertainty.
Yeah. Yeah, regime uncertainty, that's a big thing that really kills business. If you don't know what's coming down the pike, whether it's regulations or taxes or anything like that, there's just, you might as well not even put in the risk, time, and money, the investment that it takes to start a successful business. So now, but is this only going to affect people in the United States, you think, or will the regulations that are passed, this net neutrality and other types of things for the internet in the United States, is that also going to affect people living outside of the United States?
I don't think so.
Okay.
It's primarily geared towards it's the FCC, and this is a U.S. thing. And up until now, the U.S. has been the hotbed of entrepreneurship for the internet. Silicon Valley is still booming along, but even there, Silicon Valley is still sort of riding on the glory of former years. And all the other little the Silicon Forest up here in Portland, the Silicon Prairie over in Nebraska, all these other efforts have gradually sort of evaporated away in the face of regulation by those various states and the tightening business environment here in the U.S. So yeah, internationally, this is not the case. Other countries are a bit restrictive. China's pretty restrictive. Russia's somewhat restrictive. And there's certain countries in South America that are somewhat restrictive, but by and large, this is a U.S. clampdown, and it's just one more of those things where the U.S. is sort of self-isolating in a way, and that's another reason for me to look about getting out of the U.S. Where I live here in the U.S., it's pretty rural, it's pretty safe. I don't, even if things get really bad, I'm not expecting to have to deal with the jackboots and all that sort of thing. But even if I'm safe, if you're cut off from the world at large, just as a point where the future is really getting sweet. I mean, it's going to be booming away outside the U.S.'s borders, and people are going to be sort of stuck behind this economic iron curtain light of some sort, where you've been pushed far enough down as an entrepreneur, you can't even afford to buy your way out of the situation anymore. So there's kind of a window right now where you can still be a little entrepreneurial, you can raise some capital, and then get international. But that window is closing. And it's definitely starting to close for the sort of telecom business I'm involved in. So,
with the question of how does this end up affecting the person, the little guy, the average person, the consumer, for me, it's just it's an issue of any time the government moves in on something for whatever reason, either imagined or seemingly real. Whether it has to do with some sort of fear that is stirred up, whether it has to do with some concern about fairness, it always ends up being people having all sorts of authority over something that they have no clue about. They don't know what they're doing. And it reminds me of that great Thomas Sowell quote. He says, "It is hard to imagine a more stupid or more dangerous way of making decisions than by putting those decisions in the hands of people who pay no price for being wrong." Mm-hmm. And that's exactly what we're talking about here. So I harmonized with a point you made in your piece that was all over the internet. You said, for those doers, makers, or creators who are still putting off their exit strategy, please reconsider. For those feeling that you have too deep of roots, thinking they won't come for your industry, they will. They just came for mine. And so, there are a lot of people who have been highly, highly, highly regulated in the United States for a long time. They were just in the minority, by comparison with maybe many other countries. And now they're not. Just slowly, one by one, the beast just kind of keeps getting bigger and bigger. And it may just be one more reason why people take a look at their future and decide, maybe it's better somewhere else.
You spoke earlier, you were wondering, how is this going to affect my customers, for example? The pricing is going to go up. Unavoidably. We run a pretty tight ship here with just two guys, and we've got a pretty thin operating margin. So if new taxes roll down the pipe, we're going to have to pass those taxes on. If regulation ratchets up our business costs, we'd have to pass those costs on. As a small businessman, you've only got so much leeway to eat your costs before it pushes you to the point where you can't compete with a larger government subsidized outfit. So I think that's probably the biggest effect that's going to be felt by the average American consumer, is the costs of the goods and the services that you're used to paying a certain price for. They're going to, as regulation gradually squeezes out a lot of the smaller, especially the smaller local companies and the regional companies, your pricing's going to go up. The supply is going to get tighter. You're not going to have the access to goods and services that you're used to, because the people providing those goods and services are doing so on such a thin enough margin, they can't handle the extra regulation. They'll disappear one by one, and you'll wonder where they went. Well, they went looking for greener pastures where they can actually pull this off. So that's, as far as the effect on that, that's where I see that going.
Yeah. This is very interesting, and I'm glad we had this chance to talk to you. I don't want this to come off as kind of an all negative podcast. The reason that we're doing this is to show people that there are other options. There are, more than 200 countries in this world that you can check out. And so, we want to offer these types of options to people. You have been a successful entrepreneur in this area, and you've done other things. So, one question I like to ask the people that come on the podcast is, for new people that want to do something like that want to start their own company, that want to, live internationally or something like that, what is the best piece of advice that you would give to them?
Oh, the best piece of advice, get a portable skill set. That, and network with people who are already out there doing it. With the internet itself being an educational medium, you can teach yourself almost anything. You can look at, what do you know now? What else do you need to learn to be able to do what you do for people in another country? Network in your industry, meet people in your industry who maybe are working internationally, make friends with them, pick their brains. How do you do this? How in my particular industry, how do people who are already doing it outside my borders, how do they make a go of it? How do they get started? And what skill sets do I need in whatever industry I'm in to be able to take contracts outside my home country? And then, get your passport in order, get a decent world-capable cell phone, a decent suitcase, and take a contract. Even if it's a small one, if you pay for your plane ticket and you pay for your hotel and you pay for your meals, there you go. Maybe make a little workcation out of it or something like that, just to get your feet wet, and just get out there. And what you'll find is that, as Terrence McKenna put it, nature admires courage. If you throw yourself out there and you really make a good effort of it, other people in your industry, they'll see that, and a contract comes along that they think you might be suitable for, they'll give you a call, and you just gradually network your way into the international space, and there you are. And then as far as political risk, try and spread yourself out. There was a number of people speaking to that at Anarchapulco about trying to operate out of multiple countries.
Yeah, I was on that panel.
Yeah, that was some good stuff. With the modern internet, if you want to learn a skill, you can. It's not like it was 5-6 years ago. Pretty much anything you want to learn, you can find on Instructables or YouTube or the Maker community or Khan Academy. Or there's so many resources out there to teach yourself, whether it's copy editing or programming or music writing or writing of all sorts of different types. There's many different publications out there. You could start just by writing little articles and putting them on your blog and gradually working your way up to a decent readership. There's a lot of different things you can do. It might take you a year or two to get a skill or two under your belt, but that's the legwork you need to do for yourself, and it's possible. It's completely possible.
I love that. I love that quote. Nature admires courage. And in line with what James was saying, it's completely true. It's there's some tough stuff happening, all over the world, but we're talking about some of the tough stuff happening in the United States. But the reality is that once you make up your mind, you're no longer just lying in stagnation. And it's a very exciting time when you start looking at the possibilities internationally, isn't it?
Oh yeah, the future that's shaping up for the human race is just absolutely amazing. I'm incredibly optimistic about the next couple decades. Oh boy, especially the technologies of decentralization. There's decentralized power technologies, and I do communications technologies, and there's local food production methods, and there's innovative new ways of parenting and raising children. Dana Martin spoke to that at Anarchapulco. There's just so much. There's so many cool things going on. You want to be out here and you want to be participating in it, because it's going to be a really amazing future, and you don't want to miss out. It's just fantastic.
All right. Well, fantastic. Great advice. Interesting story, and glad to hear that you're going to make some lemonade out of those lemons. And I'm excited to hear about, what the next, few years hold for you.
Yeah, me too. It's going to be great.
Travis Boyd, thank you so much for joining us for the Borderless podcast.
Thanks, guys.
All right. Well, that was great. That was a kind of a different type of Borderless podcast. I was glad that you said you ran into him at Anarchapulco. Yeah.
It's a very interesting story. And, like I said, I don't want people to feel negative about it. We're just kind of looking at what's actually going on. And, we want to give people options and try to make it easier if they want to do something like Travis is doing to move on, maybe move internationally, look at other markets, look at different places that may be more conducive to what you'd like to know,
All right. Yeah. Well, I hope that was helpful for some of you. Those of you who'd like to get involved on the conversation regarding the Borderless podcast, we encourage you to go to borderlesspodcast.com. You'll see a big Join Now button. You'll get access to our private Facebook page.
Also, that'll put you on the updates, email updates, so that you'll see all the stuff that we got going on. And if you're thinking about doing something like this, then we'd really like your participation.
Another Borderless podcast coming up soon.
Thanks for joining us for the Borderless podcast. Traveling, investing, and living beyond borders.